three things at MEF, and the first one, we call it insight. The second one is interaction, networking like that. And the third is impact, the activities we do with the industry, best practices, code of conducts, etc. But the first one, insights, I'm very glad to say that we provide a lot of information to the industry to reflect on, to think on, to act on. And one of the main delivery is our yearly series of surveys. Now today, shortly, we're going to announce the 8th consumer study, consumer trust study, which is our regular, as you can see, by the attempt to take the pulse on what our consumers and mobile users believe of this industry and the industry in general in terms of important topics, fraud, privacy issues. We have been the barometer for a lot of things happening. Read the 8th, if you have time, reports, and you actually get the narrative of what's happening. There are some real big trends at play. Later on, we'll talk more about trust, we'll talk more about fraud, and I will make sure that some of those snippets are available. But if you go online, you will find the page and the report available for everybody to download. Our members get a full list of data as well as a full list of reports. There's more coming. It's not just the consumer trust study. Every year for the last 2 years, there'll be a third, we have done an A2P markets report where we look at the business messaging numbers and what's happening out there. I have the pleasure of inviting here somebody to join me, which is James. It's somebody you haven't seen all the time, I'm sure. Do you know this guy? There it is. Well, actually, James has been kindly put together all of the last 2 days. It's been a lot of work, has been doing a lot of work still. And in his role at MEF, he's been told by the evil boss, me, that, at MEF, we're not allowed to have opinion. We don't have agenda. We are really here to get our members to talk. And we stimulate talking. But no ideas. Don't say anything. Well, this is his free 30 minutes of airtime. You will be able to talk for the first time in 1.5 years that you've been with us. So don't get too excited. No, but seriously, James is a source of information. He's valuable. He knows a lot about this market. And a lot of the time, he has to make sure that he let other people speak. So right now, you will be able to tell you everything you think of this industry.
Dario, I haven't always behaved. I'm trying my best to behave.
So moderate yourself then, okay?
Yeah.
I gave you freedom, but not too much freedom kind of thing. Okay. No, but these are some of the snippets on the reports that you will see, and do feel free also to comment and to shout us. We do have microphones which works much better for the online session. Okay, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Are you ready out there? Yeah. We're doing it again. This is not working very well. Are you ready?
Yes.
Are you ready? Oh, that's better, yes. And online, I'd like to see comments. I say, yes.
Yes.
Okay, good, we're starting. So we're starting with a reminder, all of these data, wonderful Excel tables, if you like. You like them? I love them. They're all available to download it. Let us know. We have a real raw data for you to look at. But we've asked a colleague of us to put together these 10 surveys, 10 different countries out there, looking at 650 respondents for each country. We do it, as I say, multiple years. We've got a bit of a history of our numbers as well. Those are the 10 countries, by the way, if you're wondering. And they tend to be pretty regular. They're always the same. So we keep on that. The business messaging market this year, however, our partner decided to change some of the 3 important countries and agency they use to collect the numbers. My first concern was, are they going to be showing numbers that are completely different? If you start talking about China being different and Japan, India, South Africa, these are big countries as well. Well, I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing, but on these numbers, and quite a few, we have a consistent reporting. So the numbers are pretty accurate. In this case, when we ask 2 people, do you receive business messaging in this wider sense? The answer is stable. 89% said yes, I do get it on SMS, that's one. And about 11% has never been touched by that. And that's constant. So we will get him out of a cage talking. What do you think of this? So are we managing, the last few years, I have to admit, it was the year post-COVID, so we've seen the big advance. But are we now plateauing as a business messaging in terms of reach out, got in terms of users as far as it could get?
Okay, so if we look at the use cases for SMS, when SMS came out, we've got to look at the history of it. So it was actually developed to be ultimately A2P. It was developed as a means for mobile operators to communicate with us to provide some form of network update. It was never designed to be P2P. It became P2P. The network operator started to deploy the SMSCs. We actually have people in the room who were involved with that back in 1993, believe it or not, 29 years ago. So the first commercial SMSC was deployed at Elisa, the network operator Elisa in Finland. And we moved forward, and then in 1998, actually in the UK, I'm proud to say that, was the first dedicated A2P SMS aggregator. So it was a British company at the time, and they have since been acquired by Cinch. So A2P SMS on its own has been around, so business messaging, if you want to call it that, has been around for 24 years, actually. So it's been around a long time. And definitely COVID, the adjective or the phrase ubiquity, has been used several times during this conference. And I get pulled up for using that so much about how ubiquitous SMS it is, because it is. And something very interesting happened in the past few months, and that is that there are actually now more active SMS users than email users. So all of us in this room and online have multiple email accounts. I've got 4. But SMS is actually now getting more eyes on things than ever before. And quite simply, because there are 5 billion people around the world with access to SMS, even if it's just one way receiving it, all will have the capability, I'm sure, of replying, then it has become the de facto means of communication by governments as well. So that's something new. It's moved beyond enterprises into the government side of things. So when we're talking about business messaging here, it's easy to think it's just about for-profit enterprises, but actually business messaging is about more than that. You can look at as well how charities, religious organisations, governments are interfacing with us, users, consumers. So what I'm very surprised about the results is that for me, the 11% is very high. So I'm surprised that 1 in 9 people in the world, if you look at the countries surveyed, by far and away the largest in terms of population, it's with China, but then you've got India as well, with 1.3 billion coming behind there. So that's, sure, there are going to be some people who might not have received it, but frankly, I'm very surprised that 11% haven't been touched by business messaging. The volumes have increased. I've talked to many MEF members over the past year and a half since I joined, and most have seen their business increase. Now, as Dario's asking the question, has it plateaued? Yes, there has been a plateau, but we heard from Nick Lane, analyst from Mobile Squared, that the actual volumes for business SMS will be increasing 50% in the coming few years. So yes, it's hit a plateau, but there will be even more of an increase, Dario. It's a long way around, sorry.
Yeah, and by the way, some of the numbers can always be deceiving, because I invite you to look at and we'll talk about later, some of the numbers, because China seems to have really stalled in terms of numbers. Yeah. That's impacted. But there has been a very healthy growth in some markets, specifically the other developing markets, and not only. But you touched on A2P traffic per user, and if you look at that, I'm quite surprised, because we have in Gene comments before we go there.
That 11%, is that related to like prepaid phones?
We do have, I think, somewhere of a distinction between prepaid and postpaid, but we're not looking at this. So it could be. Do you think a prepaid has got an impact?
Well, their numbers probably are not in some database, and they don't receive, because everybody receives something.
Correct. These numbers are for, these numbers are based on people. So we asked them, have you received? So interestingly, would they be receiving if you're on prepaid? Maybe they're in the no-call list, or not. Or if they do have something that works in those countries. But yes, interesting questions, because theoretically all numbers are available. But authorizations might be an issue, etc. But what also surprised me was this slide, and maybe Jean, if you want to comment on that, which is, and I'll ask you as well. But traffic-wise, I see this a normalization of traffic. So if you look at that, the first is a bit small, apologies. The first column is how many people receive one message, how many people receive 2 to 5, and then 6 to 10, 11 to 20, and more than 21%. If there is one thing, fewer people receive more messages, the last column, so the blue one dipping down. That's, sometimes we think it depends if you're receiving, if you were receiving a lot of more messages during COVID, that could be different. But there's not a massive change, which could be a good news, or could be maybe not. I mean, obviously, I know that from some of your financial numbers out for people out there, your traffic is growing. So it could be, as we know, that more companies are coming, but users are not badly affected. I mean, usually there'll be a synonym for spam if you're seeing too much growing on one side. So you have mentioned these. Let's go to the next one. Age. Okay, let's see who is not getting, or who is not receiving, who is not reading, who is not realizing they're receiving business messaging. Your definitions, if you want here. But commercial messages penetration by age group. Any surprise there? We have a 55. We have found them for many years. We've managed to say that for some reason, some of not just SMS but other services were not hitting the older population, and that could also be part of their digital transformations. They did not have online banking. They did not have deliveries from Amazon. That must have changed massively. This is our first post one. So the 93%, the highest numbers, only the 35 to 44 used to have a similar one. And interestingly, other markets are shaving off some of their age groups, not markets, some of their penetration. So we probably are seeing some very big shift, and I still think this is a COVID impact, guys. So we're still realizing what's happening in the industry out there. And some of our younger users are definitely finding something else that is no SMS, which is not a surprise maybe, but it's not that dramatically decreased. It's still the same. But in my mind, I'm starting to think that could be a challenge.
Well, from another MEF survey last year, what really, of course, this is if you're looking at SMS, but what really hit me from a MEF survey last year was actually looking at the over 55s and their usage of likes of WhatsApp. And actually, it was really, really strong. So I think we've got to get out of our heads that WhatsApp and chat apps are purely the preserve of younger demographics. They're not at all.
I got a slide for that, exactly.
Oh, have you? Okay, that's good. Because, yeah, this was last year.
No, and I'd like you to comment on this year as well, because the numbers are showing something. So WhatsApp is now young and trendy. Oh, my God, I feel a bit old as I say that. Don't repeat it to anybody else. But. Well, I did mention before that the mobile-first economies are really spearheading some of these growth. So if you're lucky enough to be exposed to Brazil, South Africa, India right now, you will see there is a real surge in traffic. And that's that's true for what we hear. And that's also represented in the survey of people are saying how many messages you receive and do you receive messages. A big jump and a much bigger market. As I was saying, some of the big drops, actually Japan, different things in Japan, and could be digitalization, could be others. I'll wait for next year to have the final words on Japan. But China, we know that China has got a complex year, not just the lockdown, but it has been effectively stopping some services like a Didi completely, so they couldn't get new customers. So part of the digital economies in China last year have been not frozen, but limited. Somebody or no? No, that's me talking. I like my own voice, guys. I could hear it from a distance. It sounds lovely. But that's the mobile-first economies. Interestingly, the laggards here, an opportunity for us to grow. Still some of Europe and US. So look at Germany, look at US. Actually, quite a bit of improvement in US in terms of penetration of SMS. So believe it or not, that growth is happening there. So good news if you're working in the US as well. Should we talk about the not so good news?
Yes.
Is it not so good news? Tell me, what do you think of this?
Well, given we actually have a group within the future of messaging looking at the banking fraud, and we have a couple of the members of that group in the room right here, looking at banking fraud in South Africa. South Africa has unfortunately been famous over the years for being a hotbed for fraud over many years of various types, whether it be payments or messaging. And it's clear there is still a lot of work to be done in South Africa, and MEF is absolutely working together with the mobile operators and regulators, messaging companies and other parties to do its bit and to try and help. But that result, unfortunately, does not surprise me whatsoever. Yeah. And if we're looking at the other countries down the list, it's much of a muchness, really. It's nice to see the UK a slightly bit lower. As Dario mentioned in his introduction, MEF administers the UK SMS Sender ID Registry Programme. So that's a programme which involves the 16 agencies of the British government and also big merchants, so whether it be banks, retailers, etc. So they can tell us basically what SMS sender IDs their consumers, customers can expect to receive SMS traffic from. That helps to prevent fraud on the SMS shortcode side of things. That moves things though onto the long code side of things. So collaboration is absolutely key. We've got a session today which I'll be moderating talking about the area of SMS fraud, and it's very clear that the mobile operators, messaging companies, CPaaS providers, everyone has a role to play. So those figures don't surprise me, but if you look at Japan and how low that spam rate is, that is rather good, and I think that's something we should all aspire to. But what we've got to remember is the culture in Japan generally is very, very different. Children from a very young age are used to receiving as presents money in red envelopes, and that you've got this real clash over there in Japan with ultra-traditionalism. So people love cash. People like paying with cash over there, yet it's the only country in the world where you can buy anything from Amazon and charge it to your mobile phone bill. So it's a very weird situation there. And Germany, actually within Europe, is a similar situation. So people still love cash in Germany, and they've been rather late at adopting even credit cards and mobile payments and everything. But of course, the pandemic and COVID and physical establishments stopping receiving cash, for whatever reason that might be, there's commercial reasons, of course, for doing that now because cash handling is expensive, then that is also a factor. So there's, I think, some cultural factors in here underlying as well.
And so we give a special prize delivered right now to Japan for well done on spam. And we got Pat, I think, in the back. Comments, please do.
Sorry about the earlier technical glitch.
I like my own voice.
You look very well there, actually. No, just a quick question on this. So on the, like my own experience, and the MEF register is replicated in Ireland, I think. The unsolicited messages were of the scam type, as opposed to advertising, shall we say, unwanted advertising. These numbers seem very high. I'm just wondering, is there a technical solution, or is this really unsolicited advertising that people consider to be, intrusive?
And I think that's a good question, because I'll reply to that. We're asking them. And if you ask a person, have you received spam, I think how much of that spam is things that they sign up for and didn't want and receive anymore. So I think probably the absolute number, it's a bit scary. I think it might be worse than it really means. However, as a trend, it's worthwhile. UK is a good example. UK was much lower than that. And I think it's actually the impact of a registry. We limited the success of the proper sender ID messages, which, the one that says Barclays, NatWest, and so on. So they started sending so many more messages on Misden and increasing the volume with a lower percentage, trying to compensate the business models. So we've seen an incredible amount of the last year, I think, of spam messages me personally, others, that are trying to get you to do something. So and there is a bad in the industry, so lots of bad PR, and lots of press, trying to cover what's happening out there. However, the successful rate of fraud has gone down massively. It's just that it's starting to get a bit more desperate. So, and you can also balance it out. Say, well, you have less successful fraud, but you have got more spam. Well, this is bad. Hopefully we'll learn to take everything down. Spam is what makes email a less interesting platform than SMS, because too much spam means that your return on investment is lower and you have to send too many messages, people don't read it. So that's why we think it's an indication for long term. But if people's perception of spam is still high, doesn't matter, it's still there, not going back. We heard it yesterday with Nick saying people don't check their SMS inbox in 3 hours anymore. We checked once a day, they say, once every 2 days. That's not good for the industry. So we need to keep an eye on that, I think. I got 5 seconds left. But we'll keep on going. No, yes. I think just give us. I'm having too much fun. So I just wanted to show what you were saying before. Before we get there, one thing that I do like in the report, which exists, we haven't published yet, but is the preferences. It's still consumer. So we ask them, how would you like to receive your business messages? How should businesses talk to you? Email is still up there. It's actually not growing that much. It's 46%. Text messages is really a good number too. WhatsApp is surprisingly a good third position, and then phone calls. It shouldn't surprise. I mean, we've done it every year, and people always say WhatsApp is what they want. Do they receive that many messages on WhatsApp? We know. But if you ask them, they'll say that they want WhatsApp. And actually, SMS is growing stronger. It's not going down. In terms of preference, they, take the 1%, the intelligent people who do the analysis say, well, 1% in these numbers, more or less, don't mean much. We'll see next year. But a 3% improvement on SMS year on year, it means there's really something probably positive happening on SMS. People are accepting SMS. It's the opposite of what I was expecting. And probably WhatsApp, phone calls. Instagram is growing. Well, the real one that I think is worthwhile to say is Facebook messaging. We have a generic malaise in Facebook messaging, but Instagram, part of Meta, compensate. But Facebook messaging is probably not as strong in many of the elements we looked at. You mentioned before something that I did like. I'm going to jump on these, but more of that later, and preferences by age. But that's really starting on who's using your OTT solutions out there, because you don't just want to talk about SMS. So let's look at the first one. Look at this straight line. It's at the bottom, that's Instagram. So 4% of your 55 plus would prefer to receive business communication on Instagram. They don't even know what it is. But if you look at the 16 to 24, that's a very healthy 13%. So Instagram would work for youngers. And it's predictable. It just goes down. The older the younger you are, the more likely you would be to use Instagram. Now look at instead this trend, which is what you're highlighting as well. Well, the younger you are, the less likely you are to use email, or vice versa, which is older people want email as a communication tool. And I think that one should be your SMS. It's almost perfectly in the middle. So if you're looking for something that is generically accepted, SMS still fit the bill. And it's very nice numbers as well. Now, this should be WhatsApp. No, sorry, do I get it wrong? That's texting, and let's see if I go WhatsApp's coming up. Magic, yes. There is a slight bump in the curve, because I really had to do a curve to fit it more nicely. The older generation, the one that was used to actually pay by text and love instant messaging, the 45 to 54 have fell in love with WhatsApp. It's like, yes, give me more. It's not probably transparently the young users like WhatsApp as much. Still very healthy numbers in a session, but it's that kind of, maybe there's something else. And when we look at our numbers, you can imagine Snapchat, TikTok, a few platforms are emerging as well. But that's the real numbers, and I will not tell you all because I'm running late by 3 minutes. And I think James will now come and hit me in the head, try to stop me.
I won't actually, because I love this topic. But I do like the next topic coming up as well.
So I'm going to leave you now, but only to remind you that all of this is available and more. I'm just flicking on some of the additional slides we got there for you to soon to download in a proper paper with analysis and so on. But definitely to download right now. All of the data for the 10 countries is available for you to play with, and more will be available soon. If you're in the US, we have these ones specifically in a vertical for college students looking down at all of those trends about new things happening, new platforms and so on. You'll be very interested in that as well. 5 minutes. It's all yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dario. And thank you very much all. So as I was reiterating just a final comment to that previous session, remember WhatsApp, chat apps, use them for any demographic. I moderated a session at Mobile World Congress, and for me, I mentioned it yesterday, but if you weren't with us yesterday, what hit me is that even if you're a business or an organization that has never used business messaging, you can jump straight into, for example, the likes of chat apps such as WhatsApp Business Messenger, and you will find that the vast majority of your audience will be using those. So you can use those. So don't just think you've got to start rolling with SMS. You don't. Right. Next up is a topic. It's not sometimes the easiest to get across, but it absolutely has a huge impact across business messaging, because you can have fantastic solutions, you can have the commercial model just right, you can have amazing team members, but if the regulation is computer says no, you can't do anything, you can't get anywhere. Regulation is so important, and many of us in the world of business messaging know that. We know how different it is across the world. And joining me right now is Simeon Coney, who is the Chief Strategy Officer with Enea Adaptive Mobile. So, Simeon, great to see you. I missed that. Could you just speak again? Because we missed that.
Yeah, am I coming through loud and clear now?
You are now. So sorry not to have you join us, but no, you're coming through loud and clear. You are the Chief Strategy Officer with Adaptive Mobile Security, now Enea Adaptive Mobile Security. Just explain who you are, your background, what Adaptive do, and the background behind choosing these topics. So when I was talking to you about what you wanted from the session, and this topic came up, and what prompted you to move into that direction?
Thanks, James. Yeah, so, been working in telco for well over 30 years now. I remember having to find the maintenance menu to send those original SMS messages, which unfortunately shows my age, I think. And yes, at Adaptive Mobile Security for 18 years now, we've really been focused on delivering protection and control solutions for the market. What we've really focused on is how can we make the whole experience of being digitally connected on your mobile device safe and secure. And that really spans a broad spectrum of things. You know, it's against unwanted communication, it's about enable people to express preferences, and it's also about finding behaviors and engagements that would be damaging to end users. Sometimes those can be very well intentioned, sometimes they can be absolutely outright malicious. So we see such a broad range of engagement. I mean, today we're protecting almost a quarter of the world's population. So we see a very broad spectrum of events. And one of the things I really wanted to talk about today was what we're seeing in terms of regulatory and industry awareness on best practices, because there has certainly been changes over the last few years, and I think we can certainly agree that when regulation meets industry, there is always a lag on time there, and there's always a gap of knowledge and experience. So really what we wanted to do today was to talk more about what we're seeing and possibly some areas where we can look to improve information, improve best practice, improve operations to help everyone.
Simeon, before we roll into your presentation and we start talking actually about the regulatory side of things, let's just talk about the threats in the marketplace in relation to A to P, what's been going on the past couple of years. So from talking to so many MEF members, it's become clear that there's been an increase in the number of threats, clearly using COVID as a veil, and that indeed was a principal driver for us to set up the SMS Sender ID registry that Pat Flynn earlier was alluding to in Ireland, because the health authorities from the government there came to us and said, we like what you're doing in the UK, we think that should be brought to Ireland, and we were unable to initiate that and move with that. Have those threat numbers, the numbers you are seeing coming through and being blocked by your solutions deployed globally, have they decreased lately, or are they still as much or still as frequent as they have been in the past year or two? What's going on out there in the world? Because you're a global company.
Yeah, I mean, well, firstly, in terms of threats, I think let's put them in terms of two buckets. I mean, there are the security threats, and those are continually issue-based. You know, so one day there'll be a tsunami of threats, the next day may be quieter, the day after maybe just as severe as the previous day, even higher. You know, any crisis, any exploit, any newsworthy item, any system weakness will be used by attackers. So, you know, never let a good crisis go to waste is their motto there. I think, though, the other aspect of threat to the A2P industry is consumer fatigue, consumers not embracing and adopting. And sometimes that's not just malicious. It can be misintentioned information. It can be over-communication, overly aggressive, inappropriate, and a whole range of behaviors that are just not what the consumer really wants to receive. And I think that's an interesting area as well that we're starting to get to see more industry focus on. It's not just the things that we would traditionally consider to be bad.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. So, I mean, the first thing is, and building on your previous point there, James, I mean, yes, things are continuing to increase. You know, the volume of items that we are inspecting, the number of rules that we're needing to help people comply to, the number of things that people are concerned about in their business continually increases. Whether or not the attacks or the abuses themselves increase, the volume of things that people are interested in is absolutely increasing every month. And I mean, this is just an example of some of the areas. I mean, the key thing is this is not restricted to any one geography. We're seeing initiatives right across the globe here in all corners of the world where regulators are responding to customers, they're responding to the market changes, and also the industries themselves are starting to establish best practices. I mean, there's this inevitable cycle that as traffic grows, it will get more attention by regulators. As more traffic is sent, inevitably customers will receive communication they didn't want to, and they will complain, which in itself will generate attention by regulators. So it's somewhat of an inevitable cycle. The other factor, of course, is that increasingly the mobile industry is just one of many interconnected industries. I mean, James, you mentioned the financial industry there. You know, we see them so reliant on mobile communication for their business that their regulation starts to impose on mobile regulation. So it's certainly what we're finding is this evolution from just looking from traditional bad traffic to an evolution towards really helping consumers across a broad range of industries and helping them all the time. You know, this is not just the responsibility of traffic that one person may send. This is responsibility for that customer's entire daily life on that device. You know, we need to help them ensure that they are helped all of the time. And I think, firstly, the biggest challenge for regulators is how are they able to get appropriate and timely information to make the right decisions? As an industry, we are sitting there absorbing information and traffic on an absolute minute-by-minute basis. The regulators are typically responding after the fact to data points that come to them, whether it be from end user complaints, whether it be on feedback mechanisms, whether it be on other industries. And the comment was made yesterday about there is a difference between having a knowledge of the market versus being an active participant in that, which very much comes down to the speed of response. And regulation will always lag the market and the issues faced there.
Simeon, if I could just come in here, what about consistency? Because when we talk about SMS, and we know how much SMS plays a role in the world of business messaging, it's still very dominant as a channel globally, there's this inconsistency across the industry where you hear certain parties saying SMS should never be used for two-factor authentication. It's bad. It should never be used. But then, if someone doesn't have a smartphone, a consumer, who needs to be authenticated, if they don't have access to Wi-Fi or mobile broadband, how's that going to be achieved without SMS? So what about the importance of the industry speaking consistently with a voice, and who from the industry should be the spokesperson for that? Is that the role of organisations, member-led organisations like MEF, or from your perspective, who should it be?
Yeah, so it's a perfect point, I think, there on when people make statements or when industry organizations make statements, and by industry, I don't mean necessarily the telco industry, there is generally a starting point. There's a reason, a catalyst, a cause for making that, or if you like, that started off an initiative. So yes, when we see people say SMS, is it wholly secure for sending two-factor authentication messages? Great example. Statements made, though, on solutions are, as you've just pointed out, so often in absence of the actual operational practical realities that is said at every single one of these conferences by at least 5 or 6 or 7 people. It's ubiquitous, it just works for all users. Yes, there are some brilliant technology solutions out there that work for a minority of users. And so I think that comes down to having data available. When people are making pronouncements or recommendations, I think as an industry, we are in the best position, we, I mean, us, the MEF community, amongst others, to be able to say, okay, great, how does that apply in all of these scenarios, in all of these situations? How does that reach people in these countries? How does it reach people who don't have smartphones? How does it reach people who may not have a permanent data connection, who may not have biometrics embedded in their latest devices? So I think having that data set and say, is this a solution intended for a subset, or is this something that needs to apply for everyone, will help level and actually enrich people's engagement with our industry to consider these broader and more important perspectives rather than just taking a technology solution.
I think it's something as well that all of us, I'm sure, in the room have been seeing, particularly if you're from the UK and countries close to here, is that SMS fraud and instances of it are now starting to be reported regularly in the mainstream media. And I think back a few years, 5 years, definitely 10 years, that was never the case. So there's definitely more acknowledgement, or let's certainly say more information coming into the public domain about the issue. But like you said, we've got to get a handle on the facts and the statistic and make sure those come out.
Yeah,
okay.
I think in terms of the mainstream media coverage, that is the simplest and clearest evidence that these problems are getting worse. Yeah. Media is financially orientated more than probably many other industries. If people aren't interested in it, it doesn't get printed on a front page and they don't sell copies. The fact that there is so much attention being paid to it shows that it's something that affects more and more people in their daily lives.
Yeah, and I think you're right there as well. That fraud, for example, like grey routes that are being used and quite often used to push fraudulent messages, grey route usage has increased. It is increasing. So that was actually the keynote from Omdia at last year's business messaging event in March, I remember. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I think perhaps where regulation often fails is it's about making pronouncements of behavior, not always trying to seek to understand why something occurs. You know, why are grey routes existing? Is it because of lack of capacity? Is it because of consistency of delivery or speed of engagement, or the carrier's own abilities to provide appropriate connectivity? You know, understanding those sort of factors and really where the regulator can help rather than just recommend strict rules of adherence, I feel is another area that is often missed.
Thanks.
And in fact, I mean, on that point, I think, you know, this is my simplest slide. You know, we see such a spectrum of regulation. I mean, we talk about consistency of experience. There is such an inconsistency in regulation as well. You know, we see light touch regulation that's really designed to facilitate. And again, we heard yesterday of examples of countries where the regulator is actually trying to facilitate an effective ecosystem. And then we see other cases where there is highly prescriptive, highly defined regulation that actually in some instances can cause far more problems as a result of being well-intentioned but poorly executed. And I think, you know, that is the sharing of knowledge. And again, I know there's some great consultancies out there who talk with regulators. I think there's an opportunity as an industry body to maybe amplify the experience gained in regulation and the data to support that, to help that engagement with regulators, to help them learn. Because so often regulators have a parochial view only within their country, only within their sphere of operation. Whereas we as an industry have it for the whole globe. We have the opportunity to help educate them. So I mean, on the point of poor regulation, I mean, there are so many evidences of highly prescriptive regulation, tightly defined rules that just don't work. I mean, in this, I was just trying to find one clear example. And one is any time that something is absolutely prescriptively defined, what it does is, in essence, gives a very clear boundary to work around. You know, the simplest example of this is a defined sending limit per sender. We've seen this in so many countries where they say, right, this is a limit. Yeah, that limit is either an absolute limit per sender, or maybe it's a definition limit. Anybody who does more than that limit is considered a business. Anybody who does less is considered a consumer. You know, these are always a bad idea.
So you're talking about fair usage policies within mobile operators?
Yeah, fair usage policies from the perspective of enforcing limits rather than fair usage from a consumer price packaging perspective.
Yeah.
Because yes, there's certainly a need to avoid people abusing a connection and saying, hey, you know, I'm now going to vote 10,000 times on my favorite reality TV show, you know, using this connection. Yeah, that may happen, but that's certainly the minority. I think more it's about folks who say, oh, hey, I can send up to 100 messages per sending party identity, and everything under that is considered consumer and available at a particular price point, for example. And the chart I've just put here is what we find in so many networks. You know, without knowing anything about the regulation or the rules, we can always spot what those thresholds are, or you know, what fraud detection thresholds are by observing the behavior. So this is just a simple chart of the number of messages sent per unique sender in one gang with a volumetric threshold. So the vertical axis is how many messages per day. And what you can see is that there are a huge number of users in or members in this gang, all of whom are sending just under 100 messages per day. Programmatically, it's an algorithm that just says, hey, there's clearly detection thresholds and regulation in this particular environment that says anything over 100 per day is bad. Well, I'll just add another 5 or 10 or 50 or 100 members to that group, brings my traffic below that magic 100 threshold, and I'm never detected. I am perfectly operating within the boundaries and within the rules of that regulation. So, things like that become an arbitrary value. And so really, there are so many examples where a well-intentioned rule, or there is a need at least to put a pin in a map to say, okay, this is a value, but it becomes an empirical point that an industry builds and responds to. And that creates inefficiencies, and it creates the opposite effect of the intent of regulation.
But Simeon, what can providers do? So the days, I think, of mobile operators saying unlimited truly means unlimited. People can send unlimited SMS, unlimited minutes voice calls, unlimited data, etc., etc. Certainly when it comes to SMS, their limitations are coming in. You will see in the agreements from many operators, fair usage policy applies. And many I've seen, that limit is 5,000 a month, which is for SMS, which is still high, What's the other option if you don't have that? What could you have? Or it's just, we've got to have this certain limit, and we've got to understand this and be looking for this pattern with just random parametric routing. This is what you're looking at really here, is, for example, a SIM farm being used, so box with multiple SIM cards in. People know that the mobile operator is looking for usage of 100 messages a day or more. Let's just set it randomly with my software, one doing 89, the other one doing 98, 99, etc. What's the other option? Is there another option or not?
Well, there are other options. And in fact, we're increasingly seeing the regulation forcing the adoption of those other options. I think the reason for limits is because counting is easy. Counting is really straightforward to do. I can see how many X has somebody done. I count in my billing system, I count in various other systems. And actually the other aspect is it's really easy to articulate to end users. You have X amount to do. So it is a simple thing. It is a fair and understandable starting point. But what we're starting to see now with regulation is it going more towards, well, what actually is being conducted over that? I don't really care how many it is what you're doing with it. So that's the type of regulation that is forcing, I think, the industry to start saying, well, actually, it's not about counting. It's actually about the content, the intent of the transaction. And so, when we look at what's being regulated in terms of prohibited content, there are the things that we can all, agree and nod on, which is, adult pornographic and, gambling based on destination region. We are starting to see some other interesting areas come in. So things like contests, what point is a contest gambling or not gambling? And, becomes quite arbitrary in the assessment of that. The trouble with regulation is at some point, someone has to be an arbiter of a decision. So what makes something a contest? If a church fete wants to have a competition to support the church roof, is that a contest? Somebody's got to make a call on that. Telecom services we're starting to see, is that as a result of lobbying by operators to say people shouldn't promote competitive services? Religious content. Again, religious content is a very broad, very subjective spectrum when you start to look at the edges of that. So, is that notifying of church opening times, notifying of church fates? Is that considered prohibited content? Motivational content. At what point is motivation religious? This is where I think well-intentioned regulation starts to hit a wall of practicality.